You're listening to Make Planning Make Sense. My name is Aaron Zimmerman, and I'm a director at Centro Planning Consultancy.
And I'm Alex Roth, a planner at Centro Planning Consultancy. And as always, we're your hosts.
In this episode, we're talking with the owner and director of ULL Property, Richard Ashdown. This was a really interesting conversation because Richard runs viability assessments for planning applications. And at the moment, things are not getting built, especially in London. Affordable housing isn't being delivered. And I think along with heritage, viability is one of those two things that just really, really sticks with people. It also dovetails really nicely with the conversation that we had last week with Ollie about trust.
We had an honest conversation about the current state of planning applications and the market and how we need to potentially rethink our approach to viability in order to deliver the homes and the affordable housing that we need. Then at the end of the episode, we talk about the potential solutions to this. And listeners, as we've mentioned, once we reach 150 followers on Spotify, we'll be doing a special episode answering your questions. So remember to send us your questions to podcast@centroplan.co.uk. We look forward to answering them.
My guess is that folks are going to have a lot to think about and probably a lot to say after this episode. So please write in. We'd love to hear from you. Here is our conversation with Richard Ashdown. Richard Ashdown, owner-director at ULL Property. Thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome, and thank you very much for having me on. It's been a really interesting thing to come on the podcast. I've listened to some of them. Some of them have been really interesting, or they've all been really interesting.
Thank you.
Yeah, really enjoyed it. So thank you very much. Looking forward to it.
Really, really pleased to have you here. Just to start us off, we've worked together on projects, but could you give us a little bit of a sense of what your work is like and the kind of projects that you have?
Yeah, so we work primarily in London, although across the southeast as well, and sometimes further afield, but most of the experience is London. We've worked on schemes from a couple of units to 2,500 units, estate renewal projects, things like that. Mm-hmm. Work with a range of clients, be it institutional to private owners to registered providers and local authorities on JVs. ULL's been going about 13 years. If we're talking about viability assessments, which is a big part of what we do, then we've done several hundred of those. And we've seen some real changes in the market over that time. So, yeah, it's an interesting time at the moment.
We're going to get into some of those changes for sure. And if I could just add, on some of those projects, you've worked with just about the best darn planning agents that a team could ask for. So
100%.
I'm really happy for you on that one. But let's start with an acknowledgement of the state of the industry at the moment. There are a lot of schemes that are getting to the point where they've received planning permission and then nothing, right? It seems that development's on hold. There's been a record low in the number of new start residential developments in London. What's up with that?
So there are many people who say that the planning system in general is broken, and I suppose that viability is really at the heart of that. I listened to one of your other podcasts recently, which was the Laurie Hancock Heritage one, which was fabulous, by the way. I really enjoyed it, especially the second half. And one of the things he touched on, which really hit with me, was around this concept of anxiety and outrage, in terms of the anxiety of officers presenting something, having to make a decision in front of members. You've got to multiply that by at least 10 times when it comes to affordable housing and viability. An officer in certain London boroughs does not want to present a case to the members at committee where it's a supposedly unacceptable low level, which means that everything I do and we do as viability advisors is set within that context. So, and even before we get anywhere near the officers, even sometimes we're having those internal debates ourselves. Sometimes I feel that officers think, do you not read our policy? It's not just this is not acceptable. The impression you have is that they think you don't even think about it.
We have also thought in response to an officer's position, did you not read the policy, right? Because subject to viability is often overlooked. The disconnect between how people think things should go and how things are in planning can be pretty wide. And I think viability is probably the widest amongst these things. And so there's a mistrust, which is another one of the themes that sort of keeps coming up on these episodes. Really? But it should be just numbers, right?
Yeah.
It's just maths?
Yeah, absolutely right. Absolutely right.
Go on.
Because what we're saying is that in order to reach the correct residual land value to enable the developer to acquire the site or the landowner to get a reasonable return on his land asset, then the development needs to achieve a certain gross development value, yeah?
Yeah.
And if the market units with the social housing does not achieve that, then there's a top-up, yeah? And the top-up is grant. I mean, it's not. It's no more technical. I don't think it's any more technical than that.
The fact that it is possible to sort of differentiate different perspectives and lenses on viability kind of comes back to this existing use value issue, right? Because we're not necessarily saying you have some land, there's an existing building. If you knock it down and build something else and then sell those units or lease them or whatever, will you make money? That's not exactly the test, right?
Yeah.
It's about existing use value and the incentive to do anything at all relative to the value of the land currently. That's a fair way to summarize it. Okay.
I mean, there's an appeal I'm involved in at the moment where the scheme is genuinely struggling, it's genuinely got viability issues, and the councillors have become involved in making representations to the inspector, saying, well, you know, if you reduce build costs by 15%, add 15% to revenues, we have a viable scheme, don't we? Well, yeah, we do. So it's just not understanding relatively detailed guidance. It's like any profession has its complexity, but definitely sitting behind the whole viability piece, its numbers, right, as you say, is such a strong level of politics. And the difficulty I think I probably have, and people in my field probably have, we can understand members' positions, but the anxiety, to use that word again, that officers have to present perfectly acceptable schemes in planning terms to members is a real wall that is preventing applications coming forward and permissions being granted.
Especially at the moment, which is really difficult.
Yeah, it is. I mean, let's face it, it's not just planning and viability. It is also the availability of finance generally, and also the confidence in the industry, skills in the industry for larger schemes. Delivery isn't just about the technical aspects of a viability assessment.
Yeah. When we talk about making planning make sense, trademark, it's about our perspective as planning practitioners. And what I think is really interesting about the interplay between our two professions is that more than any other issue, viability sort of washes back on all the other considerations, and it can really cloud them in the planning balance. Something that, you know, might be a sensible site constraint at face value, all of a sudden becomes just very unworkable if the viability isn't in place to the officer's satisfaction.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. There's a couple of points on that. I mean, one is that viability work is not the most glamorous part of the property industry. I mean, I can tell you, if you have a meeting with a viability consultant on the applicant side and a viability consultant working for the council and planning officers and planning consultants and clients in the meeting, at least one person will fall asleep during that discussion. I mean, it really isn't the most glamorous thing. And yet, how many applications am I involved in where the client says, or the officers say, this is the most important part of this planning application. And you might be building a major development that's going to change a town or change a settlement in London. And this comes down to this one thing, which is fundamentally, as you say, Aaron, it's a technical exercise. So within a certain range, there's boundaries, but within a certain range, it's kind of factual. And your earlier point you were kind of alluding to, I think, Aaron, where you were saying that you've got a borough that will think, well, I'm not even going to talk to you about the other aspects of the scheme until you tell me that you're committed to the right level of affordable housing. Or they say, well, we see you're at 20% affordable housing. We don't like that. So we're going to tell you that your building looks rubbish.
When the clouds rolled in, it was like, well, actually, we've had another look at this, and actually, we don't like this.
Yeah.
And we've talked before about, you know, the lack of disincentive for the do-nothing scenario in planning. And I think that that's been a real issue. But my preference would be for affordable housing and for viability to take it out of the planning balance completely.
There are cases, and one in particular who argues exactly that point. Okay, the scheme might not have affordable housing. What's that got to do with the planning balance? It's a fact. It's agreed by both sides. What's it got to do with the planning balance? You can't say, oh yeah, but, you know, because there's no affordable housing, we like this and we like that, but actually it's dragged down by the fact there's no affordable housing. The fact that no affordable housing is a factual position. It's not interpretive. It's once it's been agreed by both sides.
No, absolutely. There's case law and appeal decisions that say, well, the policy is subject to viability. The viability is agreed not to be able to support affordable housing contribution. Therefore, there's no policy conflict. Yeah, that is just how it works. But in practice, it's the storm cloud that sits over everything else.
I guess I'm thinking about appeals really, rather than actually what happens in the committee chamber.
Yeah. Let's go into the certain range thing, because I don't want to look like one of those lucky saint ads on the tube where it's like, I just don't know why they just don't do maths. There's the quantification of it.
Yeah.
But it's also built on a best professional assessment of what those figures are going to be. Is that about right?
I mean, I don't want to get technical, but viability is supposed to be an assessment at the day of the application.
Right, okay.
But some build in growth models, even though it's outside of the guidance strictly, because it's what local authorities want to see. But it still feels like it's numbers being dealt with in an emotional environment, which just seems crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, I just want to pick up on this a bit, because we're talking in the generality. When I say it's maths, there is a mathematical and evaluation exercise. It's perfectly fine people have a difference of opinion. If I think something's worth £700 a foot and somebody else thinks it's worth £720 a foot and they've got the evidence, then it's worth £720 a foot. But not if they haven't got the evidence. They're just doing it to push the numbers up. Yeah. Or if I'm just doing it to push the numbers down, it needs to be evidenced. I do think there's a much, much stronger argument for adjudication in viability. Yeah. There is a role for another authority, person, individual, whatever, to come in and say, well, I'm making this judgment. Yeah. It happens occasionally, but it's not very often, and it should happen much more often. Yeah. The local authorities don't want to do it. And the reason the local authorities don't want to do it is because they're wedded to their policy target. This goes back to my first point, really, which was that officers seem to think that we haven't really thought about all of this before we go in. So it is a negotiation, but it's a negotiation founded in property. Evidence and dynamics, and things change, and there's a set of parameters and all that.
But going back to, what we were saying before, like it's the difference between is and should. My sympathy lies with that. I want to see more affordable homes built, but you're right. This needs to be a predictable regulatory system. So my sympathy does not extend to wanting to skirt the rules of that system. If these are the rules now, let's keep playing by them.
Well, let's start playing by them. That would be good.
Amen. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I get your sympathy to it. Of course I do. But it's, there are rules. And yes. I know that sounds like unhelpful, but I was talking to a political communications and planning consultant the other day. Yeah. Viability's been agreed, and they've thrown it out because it's not meeting their policy target. He said, well, from a Machiavellian perspective, the councillor's job is to get as much affordable housing as he can. That's what they want. That's their policy. That's their objective. They're going to do what they can to get as much affordable housing as they can. And I said, yeah, but I want as much money as I can, but I don't rob a bank. But there are rules. And that's why we have frameworks. That's why we have a methodology. And I think it works. I really do. I think the guidance works. I don't think it's broken. But it's not being approached in good faith. I think it is the people. But I'm talking about boroughs. When I'm talking about people, not undertaking this with good faith, I'm talking about when you get a local authority where you've agreed your viability with their advisor and they still refuse it. Yeah. Because it's not at the policy target level. That's the kind of extreme level I mean. And also there are advisors working for local authorities who, there are some boroughs where you probably don't get to work for them unless you're, taking a particularly strong view of life.
I'm just reminded of a scheme in South London where it was a certain number of existing residential units on site, so very high existing use value. We went through viability and the range was in like the 10 to low teens. That was the distance between the two parties on affordable provision. But that still would have been, 10% of 500 by unit basis, right? That's still 50 affordable homes and 450 other homes that would replace 100 existing market-only units. Yeah. And the council said no. For the sake of ideological purity, they would rather not have those units exist.
Everybody on 35% of nothing is still nothing.
Yeah. That's my ankle tattoo, actually. Yeah.
Speaking of the rules, and then let's jump into the people. Why is affordable housing one of the few requirements that is subject to viability?
Not many people are old enough to remember this, but viability started. Viability started. Oh, it wasn't including you, Aaron. Viability started, or the GLA toolkit was invented under Ken Livingstone to assess the amount of grant that should be put into schemes. There you are.
So that was originally what it was used for. That was the birth of the viability
gap funding
assessment.
and the amount of grant that would be needed to go into schemes.
To get it over the line, right?
I didn't know that.
I mean, in terms of the process, what happened was it didn't go into SIL. When SIL was invented in 2012, they kept affordable housing out. I've got to be honest with you, I'm not 100% sure why they did that, except a recognition that something needed to flex. Because the point is that developing a piece of dirt, nothing on the site, whatever, no planning permission or whatever, is going to have a lower land cost than it is to redevelop an office building, however redundant it might be. There's something there. So therefore, both cannot be the same requirement for affordable housing.
Yeah.
And so we do have that flex. And I'm also not saying that schemes that aren't viable shouldn't have any affordable housing. I'm saying there should be some kind of a solution. And that's why we have late-stage reviews. Now, late-stage reviews have got problems with them. I think, again, people, actually, sounds a bit rude of me, but I hear a lot from developers. This is on the developer side. Well, my funder won't accept a late-stage review. Well, late-stage reviews have been part of the London planning system since at least 2017, probably 2015, 2014. Every single development scheme above 10 units in London has a late-stage review. So don't you think they should just get their heads around it?
If we just take a couple steps back here and think about priority setting generally as it impacts on viability, you have all these added expectations. And if we go back to the London plan, right, the fast track route is mentioned first and the viability tested route is mentioned second. The NPPF also says as much as planning applications should be able to fully comply with policy and be viable.
Yes.
Local plans are supposed to be viability tested as well to ensure that their policies and their expectations can actually be delivered.
Yeah.
When did we get to a point where the viability tested route became more of the rule than the exception?
So that's an interesting question. So the 2017 London Plan guidance and the first round of PPG on viability was designed to stop the number of applications that came through with viability tests on them. Times were better and they were designed to suppress land value. This is really critical to explain to clients, really. I mean, it's getting easier now because I think they get it. But affordable housing is supposed to be paid for as part of land value capture, what we used to call planning gain. It's the increase in land value attained from the local authority, out of the kindness of their hearts, giving you planning permission, right? And they've waved their magic wand and you've now got something that was a piece of dirt and now you can build a tower on it and it's worth a load of money. So they think, well, that's where we're going to get our affordable housing from, right? Now, in my opinion, those documents do a perfectly good job. Yeah, they don't create a problem. Where they did create a problem is that, the market then became worse. So then you're coming in and saying, well, your policy and your guidance you submitted in 2017 works perfectly well, but it means now you don't get so much affordable housing. And so the GLA in particular says, well, yeah, but we didn't mean that. We meant something different. And so we're going to bring in a whole load of new aspects to play, which were never in the guidance. And they're just designed to prop up the policy guidance. But the policy guidance is fine. Yeah.
When we're always reaching for the moon on every scheme, it kind of keeps you from just getting on with it in a way.
Yeah.
Is that a challenge to viability in your view?
Well, yes. I mean, it's a challenge to actual viability, having to provide all the additional elements. Of course it is. Almost every flatted development, it's the net to gross stupid. Yeah.
Yeah.
The entire sort of development industry for residential had the view that apartments would be somewhere around late 70s, early 80s net to gross. Yeah.
And just to clarify, net to gross is the ratio of revenue earning floor space to all floor space.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But now with the advent, and this isn't just fire regulations, this has been creeping, this has been, go back to dual aspect, go back to London Plan, number of units off a core, bikes, doors, all this stuff that's got to be in the building that wasn't before. And your net to gross is now hard push to get to 70 on some taller buildings.
Yeah.
And that is a significant impact on your residual land value.
Yeah.
So it seems to me to be bizarre that the policy target for affordable housing in any one given location can be the same now as it was 15 years ago. Because even if your build costs are the same, and even if your revenues are the same, gone up at the same rate, inflation, etc., the building revenue compared to your built form is less.
Yeah.
Then what is the priority? But the thing that can flex are things that are subject to viability. Sometimes it's Section 106 contributions. Most often it's affordable housing. So that presumably is the lowest priority.
That's a really interesting point. In the process of planning, the viability line scoots one way or the other over the affordable housing provision, not anything else.
But you can't tell a member of a local authority in central London that's their lowest priority, but that's what it seems to be.
Well, no, they'll flat out tell you that you're wrong and that the highest priority is affordable housing.
Exactly. But yeah, you're right. I mean, we've got a development we're working on at the moment that's called Part Hotel. It's got co-living and it's got residential. The co-living makes money and the others don't. So why don't we just do a whole load of co-living then? Well, because that's not what policy seeks. So you're not going to get a nice big payment in lieu, which is the policy around co-living. The other uses drag it down. So what do? Well, we want a mixed development. We want a hotel. We want a,
Me too, bro.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
We have also worked in a borough where the 3-bed policy is sacrosanct. It was on a site. It wasn't that big. In theory, right, it could have been 9 units or 11 units.
Yeah.
In nearly every other London borough, they would say 9 units, you're pulling a fast one. That could be 11 units, and then we could get affordable housing. And they said, no, we want the 3 beds.
Really?
Yeah. We said, all right then.
Yeah, at least you've got a steer. The problem you get generally is there isn't a steer. And if we go back to Alex's point about what's the priority in all of these points, and the market cannot sustain all these different requirements for flats in London.
Is it fundamentally that local plan was actually never viable or deliverable? Or is it just that those local plans came forward at a time when the market conditions were way different?
House builders in London who were building flats after 2017, which is the date when in London where the guidance came out and you could go fast track, they went fast track.
They did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Come 2022, they're not. I don't need to think too much about whether those that were written in 2014 to support a 2017 local plan. What I can tell you is that ones that are being written now cannot be the same as ones that were written in 2019.
Yeah.
You cannot support the same contributions pre-mini budget to post-mini budget. It just doesn't make any sense. Interest rates, build cost inflation, Grenfell.
Yeah, Building Safety Act. Yeah. So you used a phrase earlier, actual viability.
Did I?
Yeah.
Okay. I tried to avoid that one, but
well, I'm going to have to edit this and listen to it. So if not,
fine.
then I'll have to
no, leave that in. That's fine. Leave that in. Slip of the tongue. So I think I know what you're referring to earlier. I mean, I'm sure you will wind it back. But what I was trying to say was that previously it was take a look at the scheme. How much affordable housing should we be providing? Could we be providing under the guidance? Now I'm being shown a scheme, and whether or not I'm being asked to do this, it's, well, here's my first cut appraisal. It doesn't work. Yeah. How can we now work together to make it work?
So it's just that sort of difference between how much versus whether at all.
Exactly.
Okay.
And that's more a function of the market and the and what's going on out there than it is about guidance or anything like that.
We will be right back.
We talked about the rules of the game. We mentioned we were going to talk about the people as well. I want to kind of take the side of local authorities. I mean, I can't speak for them, but I want to just try to understand their position a little bit. What would you say to the position that perhaps, market conditions are really, really tough right now, but if we just stand firmly on our position to not accept, lower than X percent of affordable homes, if we just wait a few years, we'll get the schemes that we want?
The problem with that is at the moment we do not have any homes being built at all. Those homes that were going to be built in 2025 and aren't being built will never be built. You don't catch up. We've never had a time where we're catching up. So maybe the 60s,
With public funding,
so
housing development.
All of those people who don't have homes, who are in the market, they're not going to be produced. So I would say that for now, we produce what's viable. And as it becomes more viable and the market improves, we're providing more affordable housing. Unfortunately, the systems are somewhat retroactive, slow to respond. So they kind of killed the golden goose a bit by putting in the more rigorous testing, which, as I said before, I think is right. I think it's good. But it just coincided with a bit of a market implosion. I mean, the market's been difficult for 8 years. I mean, this is not, new.
Moving on to solutions generally, where can we levy the cost of affordable housing if not skimming it from the planning gain? There are other options within the rules as they exist currently. London Plan H4.2 actually requires applications to look at grant funding, doesn't it? What role has grant funding played in your experience?
So it's something the GLA always asks for in their stage one, You haven't addressed your grant funding point, and we generally don't. And the reason is because until you know what the agreed viability position is, then they only apply grant to schemes that aren't constrained by the terms of a Section 106 agreement. So if you agree that it's 20% affordable housing, and then you say, okay, well, how much grant do I need to get it to 35%? Then I can do that. But if I don't know that affordable housing level's agreed, it's kind of not much point in doing it, really. And then when we do that, generally in London, the amount of grant per unit to change a private unit into an affordable unit above that 20% is much more than they would ever be wanted put in. So it generally just goes away as a discussion. It's not a live debate in my experience on 106 viability tested schemes. Okay. But moving that discussion on, moving away from planning and going back to the funding of affordable housing. So up until the end of the previous Labour government and even for the first few months of the David Cameron's Tory government, grant was applied to Section 106 units. Yeah. And as the market was improving, sort of post-global financial crisis and then going into sort of 2010, quite a lot of grant was going into schemes. Now, Cameron came in, and because he and George Osborne had a bent for austerity, they decided that they were going to stop grant on Section 106 and reduce grant generally. And they reduced grant on the basis that housing association rents were going to be allowed to rise. So that's when you first got affordable rent across the country, but there wouldn't be grant. So the housing associations, the idea was they were balance neutral. They could pay the same amount for affordable housing from the developers, but there's no grant. Now, almost immediately, some inner London boroughs said, but those rents in our area, 80% of market rent, really is not affordable. That's really not going to work here. And a lot of work was done, pioneered by Southwark, I think, about, what could it be, 60%, 75, one beds would be this, two beds would be that percentage. And a lot of work was done. And that kind of was all an ongoing discussion about what rents would be. But fundamentally, the same point, higher rents, no grant. Yeah.
Yeah.
Then, something like 2018, 2019, suddenly London boroughs just went, do you know what? No, we want social rent. Because social rent's the only affordable kind of rent. And you can imagine which boroughs we're talking about. And the problem is that how is it that you could provide 35% affordable housing in a scenario where you had a higher rent and no grant, 35% going back before that when you had grant and a lower rent? How could it be the same when you've got social rent and no grant? Yeah. And people wonder why it doesn't work.
Yeah.
What Homes England and GLA, as the holder of the purse strings for Housing Association grant, will say, and do say, is that we will not fund Section 106 affordable housing because it's for developers to do that. But not only do they not have that kind of philosophical approach, they also say to housing associations, and have done for the last 7 years or so, they said, we're not going to allow you to count Section 106 units into your programme, which is kind of like we have an arrangement with you and a contract with you. You're going to provide 500 homes over the next 2 years, say, but don't bother putting any Section 106 units in there. Then they kind of feel, well, we'll do it if it's exactly the right thing we want. And we think it generates benefit for us and our tenants and the local authorities we work in and all that stuff. But otherwise, that's not our focus. Okay. So instead of which, the housing associations go to GLA and say, I want to build a development of my own. I want reach affordable home over and above the affordable 106 threshold, 250,000. Mm-hmm. Now, because the Section 106 regime already subsidises, the developer is subsidising affordable housing, you, by definition, wouldn't have to provide £250,000 of grant for each unit to turn a 106 unit into a deliverable unit rather than a non-deliverable unit. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So at the moment, what we've got schemes with affordable housing requirements. So you've got a 50-unit scheme, and you've got 15 affordable units or something like that in it. It's not being delivered because the RPs don't want 15 affordable units because they don't work for them. They don't work for them. They don't want to commit the resources to them, and they're providing a deficit effectively. But if you said, well, we'll give £100,000 a unit for those, then it's less money for government to spend. Housing association says, oh, that's great. It doesn't create a deficit for me now. I can make this work. I don't have to subsidise it from my own internal subsidy. The developer's done his bit. Government's done his bit in a difficult market because we're saying right now, what's the issue? Because the issue isn't just viability. The issue is also we've got schemes that have got affordable housing on them, which aren't coming forward because there isn't an RP to take the affordable. And the Section 106 agreement says you can't complete your scheme or occupy your scheme, or you can't occupy all of your scheme until such time as the affordable housing's there. So the financier says, well, I'm not forwarding construction finance until you've done a deal with an RP.
Mm. How long until the RP get a return on its investment by acquiring that through the collection of controlled rent?
I don't know. I know that a lot of them have models that stretch out 40 years, but that's for their land-led stuff. So that's where their total costs are probably going to be higher. We're going to be higher than that. So it's a long-term investment.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
So you're talking specifically now about S106 schemes that are currently sort of dead in the water and kind of reinvigorating them with less grant funding that you would need to pay to an RP. To do
a land-led development. Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it seems to me that it's completely off the agenda. I've spoken to a lot of RPs about this, and it's still, I think the last thing I heard was some murmurings, but this has been an issue for years. I mean, it's particularly bad. It's just getting worse. But the RPs wanting to acquire units of less than 50 or something, the bigger ones aren't interested. The smaller ones don't have the money. And it's just, it's heartbreaking, genuinely, really, because these are ready to go. And that can be resolved.
Yeah.
I think it's a real shame that a planning system has been devised just so one relatively small sector, which is the RP sector, I'm talking about in terms of, GDP, if you like, the entire economy, and a massive element of the entire English planning system has been set up to enable them to acquire units on the cheap. And they've said no, and they turn their nose up at it. And I think shame is probably the kindest word I can think of, really. I think it's a real shame.
Absence of mission maybe is, which is actually still quite, a serious thing to say.
What they'll say is that, we don't get the right type of product, we don't get the right quality of product, and it gives us a problem. I get that, but work harder at it, in my opinion, rather than just say we're not going to do it.
What would the effect potentially be if the national government said, design your scheme, add on those affordable units, we'll buy them. No slap fights, no whatever. Like, let's say no more need to quibble, and then they could just administer them or give them to somebody else to administer, but they'll pay themselves back in 40 years.
Fundamentally, it's just more money coming into it, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
It needs support somehow. And whether that's a public body that is actually, getting the return, but that's just council housing, isn't it? Effectively building and getting a return on it, and it goes into their books, into the housing revenue account.
Yeah.
I love that you're like, Aaron, that's council housing.
Yeah. Sorry. But it is, isn't it? I don't know.
Yes.
I guess what I'm really trying to speak to is that there is a public good and a human right that is being insufficiently provided for. Also, economically, it is insanely expensive not to have those units available because the council still has the legal obligation to house these families, which is good, but at enormous cost. From the planning perspective, viability clouds decision-making. It slows down all development or, on a case-by-case basis can flat out prevent redevelopment of that site. So I am trying to sort of test these different little avenues to figure out how, frankly, it can get off my desk and get done.
Yeah. And things have been tried. There's not been a lack of will in certain areas. I mean, the whole introduction of private for-profit registered providers has been a move to try and get things moving, and that worked for a little while, and it's not now because they're fairly inactive as well because the metrics aren't right. And there are development corporations with the idea of enhancing the levels of affordable housing and trying to make all these things work. I don't think people realise, maybe not everybody realises quite how difficult the economy is generally at the moment.
Yeah.
And it might just be a time where we just got to, grin and bear it. And we can't have everything we want for the time being. But
the particular environment that we're in is particularly bad for new starts across all tenures. But even if it were sunny skies ahead, right? Why doesn't the organization that can borrow for the cheapest and can amortize those costs without ever feeling them over the course of that 40-year period, that also has the exclusive power of being a state, not just do that? Is it a political ideology question? Is there a counter argument to that?
I honestly think that that's more of a political economy discussion. It's probably outside my pay grade.
Fair. That's I'm putting you on the spot.
I had the same question, really. Why doesn't the government just pay for housing, right? Because I'm sure there is some economist that would tell you something about bond yields and government spending and whatnot, but I don't know the counter argument personally.
Yeah, they might do. I think for this arena, quite honestly, I'm not going to give a sufficient answer. And
fair.
People will say that it's mortgaging the future. And the problem is that I think in this country, we have mortgaged the future a good deal.
Okay, there we go. Yeah.
You can see what the right would say about it, or even the centre ground would say about, hang on a minute, we're making these massive commitments for long times in the future.
Yeah. And that is what I suspect. It's that kind of ideological thing.
Yeah.
So that makes sense. Yeah.
Let's bring it back a little bit. I'm keen to understand what things would be really positive to change, but within the system in which we operate at the moment. We've done the revolutionary segment, but what would look great to you? I
would say let's not have committees deciding on viability.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be my first one. And the others we've mentioned, which are Grant Fund 106 and capitalise the RPs or whoever's going to start buying affordable housing.
Yeah.
I mean, from a client perspective, applicant perspective, a bit more readiness to turn affordable housing obligations into payments in lieu if there is no one to come forward to get these homes built. But that's probably a shorter term. The longer term is to get some agency, whether it's your view of a public agency or whether it's housing associations or whatever it is, some mechanism for acquiring the affordable homes that are being delivered through the planning system.
Yeah. I think a greater flexibility for a cash payment in lieu would go nicely hand in hand with a bit of a fire up, the backside of an RP to say, stop being so precious about exactly what parameters, what low-hanging fruit is going to be appealing to you,
Yeah.
Do you think you could go far as an obligation to acquire units?
I'd love that. Yeah, I'd love that.
That's just council housing.
Well.
Yeah. Richard Ashdown, thank you so much for joining us today.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If you've enjoyed today's episode, please follow us on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you'd like to get in touch, then we'd love to hear from you. Please write to us at podcast@centroplan.co.uk. Make Planning Make Sense is presented by Centro Planning Consultancy and recorded in beautiful London, England. Its executive producer is me, Aaron Zimmerman. Additional production by my colleague and co-host Alex Roth. Marketing and promotion by our colleague Reese Raymond. Graphic design by our colleague Mariam Malaxi. Music by Joseph McDade. From all of us here at Centro, thank you so much for listening.